Hey everyone, Sycra here, and today I'm going to be doing a critique of one of the forum members over at the Sycra.net forums. Okay, so what we have here is an angel with wings and some feathers coming to the foreground. And first of all, I really like your mood. I think the spirit of the piece is there. I like the placement also of the character. It's pretty interesting, putting him so close to the left side of the image. Now, what isn't working for me are things like the values on him are a bit too dark. Now, I don't know, this could work and it could be intentional. You get this happening when you use photo reference, especially. Like in photographs, you'll have areas in skin where it sometimes turns to, like the value goes as dark as black. In reality, that doesn't really happen though. So, I'm not sure if you were going for a photographic look or a more realistic look. But right now, it looks somewhat like a photo in the way you handled the values. The other thing, it's the same thing with values, but on the wings, the way it gets so dark in places, like it goes to black, and again, that's not something that would happen in real life because these wings are white. So if something is white, it like light bounces off it. So you would get light bounce here and then bounce off this wing and bounce, 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 and it would fill in the shadows. So they wouldn't be that dark. The other thing that I think is really not working too well are these feathers. They're all sort of going in the same direction, and this one in particular, right here, is blocking his head, or it's touching his head, and it's a little bit odd, because I would think this area is probably the focal point, so you might not want to messy it up with things like this. But anyway, I'll get onto the time lapse and explain further. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is, here I'm just showing you where your feathers are, and that maybe you could create some movement, and now I'm just putting in with red, just on its own layer, ideas of where the feathers could go, thinking that maybe it could create somewhat of a spiral pattern and lead back towards the figure. So whenever you have elements like feathers, think of them as sort of like tools that you can use to point at things. So yeah, I just got rid of the feathers you had, quickly painted those out, and now what I'm doing is I'm using the lasso tool, and I'm just blocking in some feathery shapes. They just look like blobs right now, but what I'm going to do is just add like a stem and the fluff at the end of the feathers. I don't know what it's called. Is it called down? I don't know. Anyway, doing that, and now I'm just cutting with the lasso tool. So this whole thing is done with the lasso tool. And it's a pretty good tool if you can get used to it. But I'm just cutting out like, I don't know, little triangles to indicate where the feathers are separated. And right now the problem with this is that everything's very sharp, but you can always blur that. So I really like using lassos now to create shapes of things, because now I can do this. I just lock the transparency, and then I can just sort of paint in the lights and shadows, and I don't need to worry about the drawing, like the edges. I don't have to worry about lines or anything like that. So yeah, I'm doing that, and then I'm gonna add, whatever highlights need to be there. Like in the stem part, I figured with the white feathers, it's probably actually going to be light in the stem, if that's what you call it, of the feathers. So now I'm going to cleaning up my layers, and I'm going to add a blur effect. But I don't want the whole feather to be blurred. I want some of the closer feathers to be a bit sharper. So I'm using a quick mask, and basically all the areas that you saw that were red are not going to be affected by the blur. So yeah, it pretty much just blurred some of that to soften it out, and then I added a few more feathers, and I added also some shadows on the ground, and that's also really important because that's going to ground your feathers in the space. And now what I figured is that the focal point is his head, so I need to make that pop, and the head's kind of dark, so I'm going to add light around his head, and I'm going to add dark around the edges so that your eyes sort of focus in. Now the problem is that because I put that feather in the foreground, it's acting as a focal point because it is so much brighter than the background behind it, so it's sort of competing, and I feel like that is something that was unsuccessful, so don't learn from that because it's not good. And here I'm just doing what I mentioned earlier, which is lightening the feathers and also the shadows in him to make it less photographic and more realistic, because as I said, photos tend to either underexpose or overexpose things, so you'll get blacks or whites where there shouldn't be blacks or whites. And I'm just playing with lights against darks and darks against lights. So if I want a feather to come forward, I'll put a dark behind it. Or if I want a dark area to come forward, I'll put a light behind it, so it sort of pops out from the background. Yeah, so not much else. I'm just, it's a game then about lights against darks and darks against lights. You want to keep your general things in focus. I don't know. Here I'm just darkening the whole thing with a light gray multiply layer, and I'm using a color dodge to just bring out some lights, because you have to be careful where your highest highlights are. You want to keep them usually in areas of interest. So I had to darken everything just so the lights would show up, and I added a little bit of a halo, and I'm just gonna blend out the wing, the background wing, a little bit so it blends with the background. Alright, so pretty much that's it. Again, the big things are like the feather placement, just trying to put it more in a pattern, and also adding little feathers here and there. That shadow should be a bit darker, but anyway. And then, with the general darks and lights to keep them a little bit separate so it's not so muddy. I mean, what I could have done is, tone this one a bit down, so it's, not getting so much attention. Something could be done, and then that sort of strengthens this area as well. And then darken the outline just a bit to make that pop. Yeah, something like that. So those are the big things, and watch out for the wings, and even for the way you do feathers on a wing. I would recommend, when you're gonna do an angel or anything, probably it's a good idea to look up some bird reference to actually see how wings work. It's not something I did, so my wings look pretty bad as well. I just quickly wanted to fix the values, but you probably want to fix the drawing as well, and maybe do some research on what feathers look like. That would help, and then maybe some anatomy things as well. But overall, it's nice. It's looking good. So hope that helped, and thanks for watching.